Today on The Stream, answering the call to serve your country's military, but how does one reconcile faith and duty in troubled times?
That's an issue that some Muslims serving in the militaries of Western countries say they face.
Muslims make up a small but important number of servicemen and women in the militaries of Western countries. In the United States, more than 3,900 have self-identified as belonging to Islam. That number could be higher with individuals who have chosen not to disclose their faith. In the United Kingdom, that number is said to be around 650, and in Australia, just under 100 and said to be growing.
Well, today's program came out of a conversation we had last week. Tayyip Rashid, a U.S. Marine Corps veteran, brought up the issue of why some Muslims may be motivated to join the militaries of Western countries.
And my reasons had to do more with the fact that I wanted to feel like I belonged and that I had a right to be in this country and that my family had a right to be in this country. Because let's face it, as immigrants, sometimes because you're an immigrant, people look down on you for whatever reason. I mean, I'm not saying it's right or it's wrong, it's just the way that it is. And I wanted to serve my nation because that is what Islam requires. Islam requires loyalty to the residence where that Muslim is living. And so my loyalty is with the United States.
So joining us, Mansoor Shams, to help us talk about Muslims in the military. He's a US Marine Corps veteran and founder of MuslimMarine.org. Mansoor, does this take you back to your military days?
Yes, of course.
When did you know that you wanted to be in the US military?
Well, my background's a little bit slightly different. My reasons were slightly different. To be very honest with you, I kind of grew up in a broken home. When I came up, with the realization that, life was going to remain a bit challenging, I was going to, I decided that in order to become my own man, that the military was the best option. The military recruiters would come to our high school looking for people who would be interested. But what's important to remember is that throughout that time, not once, pertaining to the conversation today, something came in my mind where I said, okay, am I making the wrong decision? Because as part of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, I was always taught that loyalty to your country of residence was a part of your faith. So in fact, everyone encouraged me in my family, with the exception of my mother, but the reason behind that was because I was the only son, not because of any other reasons.
So you talk about that loyalty to your country of residence. It's something we heard from other service members. So he talks about the differences in time periods of being part of the armed forces. For you, I know that you were there pre 9/11.
Correct, yeah.
What was that like, and did it shift after 9/11? The attacks of September 11th, of course.
Sure. Just like everyone else, I remember where I was at during 9/11. And as you mentioned, or as the gentleman mentioned, that prior to 9/11, at least I didn't feel anything. I never thought about my skin color, never thought about my religion, never thought about which country I came from, because I just felt, that was not anything that was somehow incompatible with being a United States Marine. However, when 9/11 did take place, there's no doubt that things started to shift. Now, the Marine Corps is a very bonded sort of family, but remember that they're also people. And there's no doubt that 9/11 was not only a shaking for them, but it was also a shaking for me. I mean, imagine myself of Pakistani descent, and we're about to go to a country that borders Pakistan, where I came from, and all of a sudden, these people have been said to have attacked the United States of America. So of course, some people started making some negative comments like Taliban and terrorists, some half joking. I don't know what the condition of each person's heart is, but
these are people in the
fellow Marines. And I felt like, after I let it go for a little bit, I felt like I had to nip it in the bud. So I just kind of went at it, started educating people, telling people who I am, what my faith is all about. And I would say 90% of it stopped. And I had a pretty good experience, and I was able to actually help people learn about a faith that they had very little knowledge of.
So this is Omar Ali, who says, how can it be okay to join the U.S. military, the same one that killed millions in Iraq and other Muslim countries? Another tweet, was from Facebook. This is someone who says, don't they know that their military kills Muslims in Muslim countries? Lots of them like this.
So how do you grapple with that?
Yeah, I think the larger question is, when these people write this sort of stuff, what they're trying to say is, what does Islam say? I mean, that's what they're trying to tell you is pretty much, hey, you're a Muslim. How can you be fighting for a country that's not Muslim, right?
So, and actually, to be honest, some of the things that Malika had and the community was sharing with were a lot more harsh.
Yeah, so, I bet they were. I've heard them. You know, welcome to my life. You know, I get comments from Muslims saying, you know, you're not a Muslim, okay?
You're killing innocent Muslims, you're droning, you're bombing innocent Muslims.
But I think there's a lack of education there, right? So what I always do to give them education is I always tell them, I give them examples. I say, okay, well, if you just look back in the last 10, 20 years, what are Muslim countries doing against Muslim countries? Has a Muslim country gone to war against another Muslim country? You'll find examples like Iraq in Iran. You'll find examples like Iraq in Kuwait. You'll find examples all the time of Muslim countries fighting Muslims, killing Muslims. Right. But when's the last time you heard a guy from Iraq, a soldier from Iraq, and a soldier from Iran say, "Let me throw off my M16 and come give me a hug"? No, what those people are doing is they're being loyal to their country of residence. So just as me, I live in the United States of America. Had I been living in Pakistan or Saudi Arabia or Yemen, I would be loyal to those countries. But right now I live in America. So that's why I'm loyal to my country. That's what my faith teaches me to do.
So one more question. I'll pass this one to you, Mansoor. Dina says, how do you cope with prayers? Muslims, of course, many Muslims pray at least 5 times a day. And so she wants to know about that. And if people question you about that, what does that look like?
So I think the great thing is that, past 9/11 era, things have really changed. Those same hesitations that are being brought up right now, I had those same hesitations. I didn't know who to ask, who to go for. So I think the military in general has to do a better job in letting people know when someone comes in who happens to be following the Muslim faith, male or female. I think it's their responsibility to let them know, here, you don't have to completely change your lifestyle around. We can accommodate you. Now, as far as prayers are concerned, there's no doubt that during boot camp, I had a little story where there's not a Marine on here, right? So, okay. All right. So the story goes like this. In boot camp.
Tell it fast. Tell us the 1 minute version.
1 minute version.
Yes.
We had a Protestant and a Catholic prayer at the end of the day, at the end of each day after completing training that day. So I finally had the courage and guts to ask my drill instructor, you can never call yourself a Marine. You have to say this recruit, because we're like nothing. So you asked, and I asked him, sir, could this recruit also ask, could I do my Islamic prayer? And the reality is that he let me do it. And that day, after that, I was able to do there was a Christian, a Protestant, Catholic, and a Muslim prayer done.
Wow.
And
all because of that.
All because of that little act. Yep.
All right. Okay. Great. I'm glad we got that story in. So, hello again. This is our online post show on the stream. We're actually going to dedicate it to asking some very tricky questions. What is it like to be in the US military right now during this election period where Muslims and intentions towards Muslims, Islam is in the news every other day and not necessarily in a positive way? So we're going to put you on the hot seat, Mansoor and Laura. Abu Bakr, if you want to ask questions as well, I would love you to be able to ask questions to Laura or Mansoor. I start off with this one from Ajmal. He says, in the Marine Corps, I was able to practice my religion freely. The Marine Corps motto is God, Country, Corps. But, Mansoor, you see a lot of stories from people serving. Are there any stories where you've seen where it is not God, Country, Corps, where there is a problem?
Well, I'm glad that there's a Marine on here because that's such an important thing to mention. It's not talking about an Islamic God or a Jewish God or a Christian God.
Right.
Some people talk about, is it country before Islam?
Yeah.
Right? Well, there you go. That answers that, right? Marine Corps values, God, country, Corps. I think in general, as I mentioned before, there's definitely that work that needs to be done. I think that the military is starting to make headways. Had it been, I think...
What's the work that needs to be done? This is the hot seat. What is the work that needs to be done?
With today's conversations, I'm going to go at the crux of the conversation.
Yeah.
If today I was asked to join the U.S. Marine Corps, I probably wouldn't do it. And the reason for that is because if I'm worried about someone like Donald Trump coming into as my commander-in-chief, who's trying to ban Muslims out of this country, I honestly don't feel comfortable serving under that sort of commander-in-chief. So if Donald Trump had been around in 2000 when I joined the Marine Corps,
no way.
I would have not done it.
No way.
Period.
Laura.
And I see it as pretty much exactly the opposite. I think in a time where there is so much question about Muslim loyalty to the United States or something like that, I think now is the time for us to join more and for us to be more a part of our communities. and to get out there and show people, because people aren't going to break down stereotypes just because you tell them, hey, we're not all bad. Until we're out there in our communities helping and serving, that paradigm is not going to change. So I think now more than ever is an important part of history for Muslims to join the military.
Can I jump in here? Yeah, so I'm just, as a Muslim to a Muslim, I guess what I'd like to know is, I understand where you're coming from, right? But if your commander-in-chief blatantly says what he says, we all know what he said, how can you say that that's how you show patriotism? Working under the commander-in-chief that actually doesn't even include you as a part of the equation.
I can't really speak to political rhetoric as far as the politicians. You being a former military member, I'm sure you understand that I'm representing not only myself, but also, I'm still a part of the armed forces. But what I will say is I will follow all of the lawful orders given by whoever's commander-in-chief, regardless of their
What about
rhetoric.
the unlawful ones, Laura?
And that would be something that we handle through our chains of command and handle on a case-by-case basis. So I can't really speak to that either.
So I want to play you the thoughts from Ahmed Shama. You heard from him a little bit earlier in the show. This is what he has to say about today's political rhetoric and what it means for people who are Muslim. Have a look.
We see overt Islamophobic attacks against Muslims at large by some political leaders, which are mostly accepted by many Americans. Americans across political affiliations were only offended when the Gold Star Khan family was disrespected. And while I'm moved to see Americans among all religious and political affiliations rise to condemn the terrible comments towards the Gold Star Khan family, all Americans, including all Muslim Americans, should be afforded protection from hate speech and threats, not just veterans, not myself, not just my family.
I venture to say you would agree with his comments there?
Yes, of course I'd agree. I'd agree. I think that's exactly my point. It's not that I wouldn't do what my commander-in-chief is telling me to do. I think the good thing is that there's policies and procedures in place, and I think people should know this, that when you mentioned about an unlawful order. So there are policies and procedures in place that if there's an unlawful order that's given and you morally believe that's against what the right thing to do is, you can not do that thing. And there's a judicial system in the military, you can suffer the consequences, whatever it is. But you don't, if it's morally against what you're being, then I think it's something that you shouldn't do, obviously.
So another tough question here. This is from Adam on Twitter, and I'll direct this to you, Mansoor. So Adam says, how did these soldiers, service members, reconcile with somewhat justified, he says, suspicions and concerns voiced by their fellow service members? And he gives an example. He says, especially after the Major Nidal Hassan shooting in Texas, that's an Army psychiatrist who was convicted of killing 13 people in a mass shooting at Fort Hood. So, of course, you weren't in the military at that time, is this correct?
No, I don't remember what year that was.
I think it was 2009. 2009.
Right.
Did you think that there's suspicion? Because I'm sure people did after that attack face, who are you with? Are you with us or are you against us? And what would you say to people?
So I always give them the example of Chris Kyle. Who took out Chris Kyle?
Explain him for our audience.
So
there's a movie about him, but not everyone's seen it. Chris
Kyle is an infamous, person who served in the U.S. He's a Navy SEAL, and he was, after he'd come out, he was one day going out with a fellow veteran, and that person shot him. It was a Caucasian white male. So are we to start thinking that, should I start thinking that every, white person is not loyal to their country? Or, should I start questioning their patriotism? This is the area that we'd probably start going down.
Right.
And this is just completely, inappropriate, and it's wrong. My patriotism, I don't need to prove my patriotism to anyone, my resume speaks for itself, in my particular situation. And I think anyone who takes the oath for this country, and 99.9% of those are good people. That's it. And
Let me just put